All right, well, we're going to get started with our presentation tonight. I'm Jason Lowy, and this is my son Luke. Luke is probably my primary fishing partner. We fish all over the state, all over the country, just really enjoy the outdoors. So today we're going to talk a little bit about two of our favorite things, fishing and our faith. So I'll start us with an opening prayer. So, dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this opportunity to get together tonight to talk about you and to talk about all the amazing creations that you allow us to enjoy. The lakes, the rivers, the ocean, and the amazing species that live within them that bring us so much joy. We thank you for that and for every opportunity that we get to go out and enjoy that. Tonight we just ask for you to watch over us and ask for a good discussion on fishing, and we just thank you for all the blessings. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. So what we're going to talk about is some of the kind of the favorite fishing places that we like to go in the state of Wisconsin. So I've identified 10 of Wisconsin's finest fishing destinations. This picture was a picture that, I don't know, did you take that picture or did I take that picture? It was on my phone, but I think it's a picture looking west from the east end of Green Lake. And, you know, that's just, to me, that kind of sums up like the feeling I get when I'm fishing and just the amazing views. And so this Bible verse on here, Psalm 19:1, the heavens declare the glory of God and the skies proclaim the work of his hands. I mean, every time I see just an amazing sunset or, you know, the fog in the early morning with, you know, the backdrop, whatever that might be, and, or just the clear waters of the lakes and rivers that we fish and just the beautiful fish that come out of them, I just think of God all the time. I think of his beautiful creation. So, Luke, you got anything to add on that? No? What's the coolest place you've ever fished?
I would say anywhere in northern Wisconsin. There's some pretty beautiful views, whether it's in the summer, the spring, or the fall, but especially in the fall when the leaves change colors and the fish are usually biting, and it's always a fun time and a beautiful setting to do what we love to do. So
Northern Wisconsin's definitely a slice of heaven, no doubt. So the first area we're gonna focus on is the Lake Winnebago system. The Lake Winnebago system obviously is close to home here. So we're at the foot of the lake in Fond du Lac, and within 35 minutes to an hour, you can pretty much be anywhere on Lake Winnebago, or even the upper lakes of Lake Poygan, Lake Butamore, the Fox and Wolf Rivers, and there's so many different launches around the body of water. Typically, most of the launches charge like a launch fee, which is $5 or $6, so it's relatively inexpensive. But there's a lot of good launches, and you can pretty much go anywhere on the system. There's even Little Lake Butamore, which is not connected by open water to Lake Winnebago, but it's also part of the Winnebago system. It's really a good fishery as well. So just a couple pictures of walleyes and smallmouth bass that we've caught over the years on the Winnebago system. This is my favorite picture right here. I love that picture because it's a sheephead, which is not considered one of the favorite fish by people to catch, except for maybe Bob. But I caught that nice sheephead. They fight like crazy, and my wife did not appreciate the sheephead looking her in the eyes, so I like that picture. So Winnebago, there's a nice walleye too that my daughter caught last summer. Winnebago's primary species, I would say walleye, sheephead are abundant, white bass, large and smallmouth bass as well, and then every once in a while you'll catch a nice northern or a muskie or some odd species. I think fishing the Winnebago system, you can fish it year-round. It's open year-round, whether that be open water or ice fishing. I primarily, and Luke, we primarily do open water fishing, but the minute the ice goes off, you can fish on the Winnebago system. So, like Little Lake Butamore, we spent quite a bit of time in, what was that, early March out there? Right when the ice, early April or late March, right when the ice went out, we caught tons of really nice smallmouth bass, so that was fun. And then like we're starting to get into the heavy walleye season on Winnebago right now, where it's really gonna start kicking off. And I know they're catching crappies out there right now as well, so, you know, later in the year, you're gonna have a really good white bass bite, on the rocky shorelines. You can catch, we've had nights where, you know, you can catch 100 white bass. In fact, Luke and Emma and I, one time, right outside the lighthouse in Fond du Lac, we practically could cast from shore there. We catch 100 white bass in a couple hours, and we had multiple triple headers, and it's really a fun thing when they start biting. Luke, do you want to kind of share like a couple baits that we would typically throw on the Winnebago system? One of our favorite baits to throw on the Winnebago system is a swim bait. Show them what a swim bait looks like. You can catch pretty much every species on a swim bait.
So this is what a swim bait looks like, a paddle tail swim bait. And basically all you do is you just rig it onto a jig head, anywhere from a 1/4 ounce to an 1/8 ounce. And whether it be a twister tail swim bait or a paddle tail, it just mimics a minnow, and pretty much everything in the whole system will bite this, depending on how big it is. This one is a 3.8-inch swim bait, which is a little bit big for most fish, but you know, bigger walleyes and bass will eat this, as well as pike and stuff. But usually I like to throw like anywhere from a 2.75 to a 3.2-inch swim bait, and that'll pretty much cover every single fish that you're looking to catch.
Yeah, I mean that's just such a versatile bait. If I only had one bait, that would be the bait I would have, and I would throw it year-round for any type of species. And you can cast from shore, you can fish from a boat. You just have to be able to cast it out there and reel it in. And there's little subtleties to catching them, which you know you can attest to. Give it a twitch every once in a while, change the direction, the speed, might get a bite, but it's just such a good bait to throw. So that's probably our best bait to throw on the Winnebago system. Green Lake, oops, did I skip a page? Green Lake County Lakes. Green Lake County Lakes, I think the primary lake there would be Green Lake, Big Green Lake. We fish that a lot. That's about 30 minutes here from Fond du Lac. And the primary species out there used to be bass primarily, but now I would say walleye has kind of become the best species over there. Bob, you can attest to that. The lake is full of really, really nice walleyes. Picture in the center is from a few years ago, a couple of 26, 27-inch walleyes that we caught in July during the full moon. But there's big pike, there's muskies, there's big everything. I still firmly believe that a state record could come out of Green Lake anytime. And you know, there's a couple shore spots to fish on Green Lake. Last night we were out there and we noticed some people fishing at the inlet, and we caught a smallmouth there, a white bass, and I'm sure there was some catfish in there, probably some walleyes as it got darker. You can catch fish from there, I would say year-round. Also in the city of Green Lake, at the bridge there, going back to the courthouse, and down on the west end of the lake at County Park, those are all good shore fishing spots. But the lake has got everything you could ever want for fishing as far as having fish weeds, you can fish rocks, you can fish around docks, you can fish open water. There's some current spots, like where the water comes into the lake or leaves. There's all kinds of stuff. So the other cool thing about Big Green Lake is it has trout, which we've been out there this week a little bit, and we've caught and kept and cleaned a couple lake trout, some 24-inch, 25-inch lake trout, which has been fun. We caught those on blade baits in deeper water. A blade bait's a piece of metal, basically, with treble hooks. Do you have any with you right now? We could show. Usually when the water's cold, you can catch lake trout a little easier because they're shallower. As the water warms, the lake trout will go a lot deeper in the lake, and they're a lot harder to catch. But that's a picture of a blade.
Here's what a blade bait looks like. It's literally just a piece of metal. This one's gold. Either gold or silver, something that shines. And usually you can catch them based on a reaction strike in colder water. It just looks like a dying minnow on the bottom, basically.
Yeah, you kind of throw it out, let it sink to the bottom. It's heavy enough you feel the bottom, and then you can jig it, and you know it rattles, and then it falls, and they'll usually eat it on the fall. You can catch everything on them, but lake trout seem to really like that. So I don't know. Do you catch those in the wintertime? On
Yep.
Jigging blades and things like
They
that.
target them in the winter
Yeah.
time.
Well, it's a lot deeper, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so in spring they come up, you know, like I don't know if they're feeding on bait fish that are coming up to shallower water, but best time of year I like Green Lake for May and June, and that's because I like the bass fish, and the bass kind of move into the shallows and they're a lot easier to catch. So that's my favorite time to fish. Another lake in Green Lake County that we really like is Little Green Lake. That lake is primarily known for its big muskies. I don't know if there's a size limit. I think there's like a 50-inch size limit on Big Green, or is it Little Green, or is it smaller than that?
It's like 48, I think.
48
That's
inch?
big, yeah.
48-inch size limit, which is a pretty big fish. I've only seen them out there. I've never really caught a muskie, but I know a lot of people who catch them out there and target them. It's a smaller lake, so I think they're easier to target. Largemouth bass are prevalent in Little Green Lake, and I like the months of July out there for bass. I think when the weeds get really thick, the bass go in the weeds, and they're pretty fun to catch. You can also catch them this time of year in the shallows around docks and in the spawning flats. So, I mean, one of the good baits to throw on Little Green Lake, my favorite bait would be a swim jig. You can kind of show them what a swim jig is. A swim jig's kind of like a swim bait, but it's got a little more pizzazz to it. And if I could pick a favorite bait, it would always be a swim bait. But my second favorite bait to throw most of the year would be a swim jig. And a swim jig is, you can rig it a multitude of different ways, which Luke can kind of show you here.
So I have two here. These are my two favorite colors. One is a black and blue swim jig, and the other one is like a crayfish color with a little green pumpkin and orange in it. And what we like to do is use a trailer with two craws, so it kind of mimics a crayfish, even though this could look like a bluegill because it's black and blue, and it's probably what the bass think it is when it's coming through the water, but it still has good action and they'll still bite it anyways. You can also rig it with a swim bait on the back if you wanted to, or a twisty tail, a single trailer on the back. And then these are good for smallmouth and largemouth.
And pike.
And pike. You can catch you can catch walleyes on these too. Basically, you just throw it out and reel it in, and if you're fishing around weeds, if you get hung up in the weeds, it has a weed guard, so it usually keeps you out of the weeds, but if you're feeling like you're in the weeds, you just give it a little rip, and usually it'll come out without weeds on it, so that's usually a good way to catch bass in shallower water that are around cover and weeds and wood.
So sticking with that bait, Mississippi River, we love going to the Mississippi River. Probably should go there more since my daughter goes to college in La Crosse. I need to go over there and do more fishing, but on Alaska, La Crosse area, pools 7 and 8 are probably one of my favorite spots to fish in the world. I mean, this picture's not really that clear, but that's a picture looking from the bluff down over Lake Onalaska, and there's just islands everywhere, and there's sloughs, and there's water running everywhere in the Mississippi River, and it's just, there's so many different places to get away from like civilization. You can literally get away from, you know, you can get out of the Mississippi River and never see another person for a long time. What I like to target on the Mississippi is largemouth bass and smallmouth bass. There's also good white bass, you know, rock bass, pike, huge northern pike, muskie on occasion, but I would say the bass fishing is probably the best. You know, that again, that's year round. You can fish the minute the ice goes out. You can fish that year round, the Mississippi, and you know, fishing's good from May or April probably all the way through November, maybe even December if the river stays open. The biggest thing with the river is just the water levels are always fluctuating, so that changes things, but I mean, it's just such a fertile body of water, it's a pretty awesome place to fish as well. You know, the other section that I really like of the Mississippi River would be further north, which is pools 5 and 5A, which is, well, this is from Ripon, but actually it's about 4 hours from Fond du Lac. It's Elma, Wisconsin, or Fountain City, which is north of like Winona, Minnesota, but on the Mississippi River. It's a lot like La Crosse. There's a ton of sloughs. You know, the Mississippi River is broken up by pools that are separated by dams, obviously. And so, you know, when the water hits the dams, it forms like a lake, but then as it filters into the lake, it's got all these sloughs, and you can just run those sloughs and go and catch fish and be, you know, just lost in the wilderness. It's a pretty awesome place. The other thing about the Mississippi River that's really cool is there's a lot of shore fishing opportunities on the Mississippi. You can find tons of places to cast from shore on the river, in the La Crosse area and even up there. And one of the cool things that, you know, like the Army Corps of Engineer does on the Mississippi River is they have these floats around the dams where you can take a ferry. Sometimes, like when I was a little kid, we used to fish out of Elma, and we would take a ferry across from the Wisconsin side over to the float on the Minnesota side, and basically on that float, which is like a house boat essentially, you can cast from there up to the dam and you can catch everything. I mean, huge walleyes, northerns, catfish, everything. So it's a really cool spot.
Do you need an out-of-state fishing license?
No, no, not if you're from Wisconsin. So, yeah, you can fish the entire river if you have a Wisconsin or a Minnesota license. So, the Madison area lakes, which are, you know, pretty close to home, about an hour from Fond du Lac. We really like the Madison chain, which is Lakes Mendota, Monona, Waubesa, and Kegonsa. The primary lakes, I think, for us have always been Monona and Waubesa. We've fished tournaments on them over the years. This is Luke practicing for a state tournament on Lake Monona, which that picture is actually right in front of the Monona Terrace or the Capitol. Is that your biggest muskie you've ever caught? Yeah, I caught that practicing for the state championship. And you know, those lakes are really good fishing. I would say, given their location, you know, Madison, and they're really busy. A lot of skiers, jet skiers, tons of fishermen, a lot of boaters, but really good fishing. The primary species out there, again, would be bass fishing, large and smallmouth bass. They do catch some nice muskies, obviously on Monona, and people target them out there. Walleyes are pretty plentiful as well. There's a dam that, to get to Lake Mendota from Monona, you've got to go through a long channel, and then there's a lock at the dam. But you can go from Mendota to Kegonsa. There's a waterway all the way to get from all the lakes. There's also a little lake called Mid Lake in between Monona and Waubesa, or it's Mud Lake, sorry, which is actually really good as well. So that's a cool body of water. Rock Lake is another lake that's down in the Lake Mills area. That's a smaller lake. It's full of bass, walleyes, northerns, perch, crappie. Fished that over the years as well. I would say that, you know, as far as baits on the Madison chain, again, swim baits, swim jigs. I would say Madison chain, there's not as many onshore fishing opportunities there. It's heavily developed around those lakes, so there's not as many, you know, public fishing areas for shore fishermen. But again, a really good place to go fishing if you've got a boat. Fox Lake is a gem. That lake's about 30-40 minutes from Fond du Lac, and it just has huge fish in it. Every species out there is really good. It's such a fertile lake. If you've ever fished on Fox Lake, like the water, it literally turns into paint green water in the summertime, and it looks really gross, but it's really fertile, and it grows a lot of weeds. It's got good depth. There's huge largemouth, huge walleyes, huge muskies, huge northerns, huge crappies. What am I missing? I mean,
Pretty much everything.
yeah, I mean, it's such a fun place to go fishing. As you can see, these are within the last, all these pictures are within the last year. trophy fish. I like May, June, and July out there. I think Fox Lake, my favorite time to fish Fox Lake is July, when it gets really hot. And Rock Lake has a ton of really rocky spots to fish on. And the fish really get on those rocks, and I think they feed on the bait fish and crayfish, and they get positioned where you can catch a lot of fish very easily in shallow waters on the rocks. Luke's favorite. You want to talk a little bit about the Eagle River area lakes and chain?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to cover, I guess, but in Eagle River, there is a ton of different options where you can fish. You can literally just drive down the road and see a lake every couple minutes. So
Yeah.
I mean, all the lakes are usually pretty clear, and I mean the water's clean, and usually there's really good fishing. I would say the best fishing in the Eagle River area is for smallmouth bass, and then probably muskies. There's some good panfish options, got some really big perch up in that area this year. As far as fishing, you can, I mean, obviously the ice gets out later up north, and it takes the water longer to get warm. But then I would say in the months of May through October, maybe, are the best, really good fishing opportunities. And I'll show you one of my favorite baits to throw, especially up north, because a lot of the lakes are mostly rock lakes. So there's a lot of rock structure on the bottom, and I would say that the fish, especially the bass, concentrate mostly on eating crayfish. So one of my favorite baits to use is a little tube. It's a 2.75 inch mini tube, and I like to use about a 1/4 ounce to a 1/2 ounce head in the middle, and basically you just put the hook in, or the tube over the top of the hook, and then you just tie it on like that. And I like to drag it along the rocks or pop it through the rocks, and it basically perfectly imitates a crayfish, and the smallmouth and the largemouth love that. And you can catch walleyes on it, pike. I even caught those perch on it. So
Yeah.
Do you hide the hook?
you don't actually have to. I don't hide the hook. Leave it open. You can hide it with
A different rigging.
a different kind of rigging, but I mean, they don't mind. You get hung up. Sometimes you get hung up, but you just kind of pop it off. And even when you do get hung up and pop it off the rocks, that's a lot of times when you get bites. They like when you rip it off. If you're just dragging it and it's stuck and you pop it off, a lot of times that triggers a bite. So that's one of my favorite baits to throw up there. You can.
And why don't you, here, give me your tube once. Show me what you mean by popping it off, because actually we catch a ton of fish doing this, and he was calling his shots 2 weekends ago when he would get stuck in the rocks. So say you're stuck and kind of show him how you pop it off.
So a lot of times when you get stuck, a lot of people actually don't know how to do this. They'll just kind of pull on it and it won't come off. But a really good way to get it off is you just take the line, and you take the line here and you have it tight against this finger, and then you have the rod tight, and you kind of just snap it like this, and it creates
You gotta really bend your rod though and get pressure on it, but when you snap it like that, I don't know if it forces the hook to go back and then it loosens, but
a lot of times you get it out like that,
yeah,
and when you can do that, it pops off, and a lot of times it gets bites.
it creates strikes. It's crazy. I mean, you catch a ton of fish that way. So that's kind of fun when you can call your shots when you get stuck in the rocks. So some other lakes up in Eagle River that we really like are Kentuck and Butternut, Anvil Lake, all within 20 minutes of Eagle River area, Vilas County, Western Forest County, huge smallmouth bass up there. That was almost a 6-pound smallmouth I caught a couple weeks ago up there. That one was on Kentuck Lake a couple years ago. That's over 5 pounds, and that was a summer fish. So there's really, a lot of the lakes in northern Wisconsin are trophy lakes, so you gotta look at the regulations. Usually they'll only allow you to keep one fish if you wanted to keep a fish, one fish over 18 inches. So you gotta look at the state regulations. And so those lakes are really fun to fish because the fish get really big in them. So you can't keep them, but it's catch and release primarily anyways, so. Rhinelander, Crandon area, I've been fishing in that area of the country for a long time. My parents live in the Crandon area, so I'm really fond of the Boone Lake and the Wisconsin River. I think it's a beautiful place to fish. Those pictures are all from the Wisconsin River. I really like the solitude of the river, and that's where I go back to, like, you know, you can go up the Wisconsin River and you can just marvel at God's creations. In fact, I'm an artist too, and I've painted a few pictures from pictures I've taken from the upper Wisconsin River, because I just love the view so much. And you know, the fishing up there it doesn't get a lot of pressure, especially when you go up a river like the Wisconsin River. You kind of have to know what you're doing when you go up a river. There's a lot of things in the river that you could hit, things like that. But primary species again up there would be bass, smallmouth, largemouth, muskies, walleyes, largemouth, or northern pike as well. And I love fishing in fall up there. As the trees start to turn colors on the river, it just makes the most beautiful backdrop. And the fishing, usually the fish are in the rivers in the summertime. When it gets hot, they go in the cooler water, and then they start to transition back to the lakes. And they usually start to feed a lot in fall, so it's a great time of year to go up fishing. You know, you can take a kayak or a canoe. You can even wade. I mean, you could fish a lot of the Wisconsin River with a pair of hip boots or even tennis shoes if you wanted to walk in the water. And you can catch, I mean, trophy smallmouth bass. These pictures here are from the lake that my parents live on. It's called Pine Lake in Forest County. That, I would say, arguably the best pan fishing lake that I know of in the state. And I fished a lot of different lakes. I don't know if you'd agree, Luke, but I mean, you can go out there and you can catch crappies pretty much year round. And as you can see by all the kids in our family, and it's just plentiful crappies. And some nice ones too. Bass, walleye again up there on those lakes. Some northern pike, a lot of small northern pike. The lake that my parents live on, Pine Lake, is the headwaters of the Wolf River, which runs all the way to Lake Winnebago, and then out of Lake Winnebago into Lake Michigan. So I always wondered what it would be like to just hop in a boat and head down the Wolf River from my parents' lake, from my pier. I could go around the world on water, which is would be kind of a fun trip. I should try that sometime. But you could go around the world, because you could go all the way out the Great Lakes and then around the oceans and come back and end up at their pier again by water, which is kind of cool. Polk County Lakes, which is up in northwest Wisconsin. There's some great lakes up there north of St. Croix, Hudson area. I have a brother that lives in Hudson, so got to know these lakes really well years ago. One of my favorite lakes up there is the Balsam Lake chain, which has 4 lakes. 3 lakes: East Balsam, Little Balsam, and Big Balsam. And just full of crappies, bass, walleye. There's a few muskie in there as well, big panfish, big bluegills. That body of water is about a 4.5 hour drive. I mean, you pretty much take 94 up to Eau Claire, and then north out of Eau Claire up to Lake Cumberland, and west on 8 over to Chippewa, or over to St. Croix Falls, and it's a great place to go fishing. I like May, June out there. I think you probably can fish there year round, but there's ample landings over there as well, and it doesn't get a lot of pressure. I don't feel like over in far northwest Wisconsin there's as many people. I know it's closer to the Twin Cities, but it's quite a great place to fish. The St. Croix River is really phenomenal as well, which runs into the Mississippi and runs through Hudson, Wisconsin. That's great fishing. There's huge muskies in the St. Croix River. There's nice smallmouth bass, largemouth, walleyes. There's also Lake Malibu, which is a really cool lake if you ever get a chance to fish. Right in St. Croix, just north of the city of St. Croix. It's a dammed up section of the Willow River, actually, and right before it runs into the St. Croix, there's a dam there, but it's formed a lake. It's not a real big lake, but it's full of fish, and it's a really cool place to fish as well. And I mean, I've fished there probably a dozen times in my life, and hardly ever see anybody fishing there. So it's kind of a cool place as well. Walworth County lakes, those are the lakes in southeastern Wisconsin, like Lake Geneva, Lake Delavan. Those lakes are really good fishing, but they get a lot of pressure and a ton of boats, ski boats, pleasure boats, sailboats, jet skis, you name it. My recommendations for those lakes, fish during the week. Weekends are just a zoo. And but had fish tournaments over the years there, and there's a lot of big fish in those lakes. The one downside to fishing down in that area is boat launch fees are extremely expensive down there, which for me is kind of hard to bite off when you could go north and fish probably better water and not pay as much at the boat launch. But there's still really good fishing down there in the Walworth and Lake Geneva area, so it's definitely worth a try if you're ever in that area. Just more pictures of Lake Delavan and some of the big fish that live in those lakes. Big northern pike and a lot of largemouth bass as well. And I would say the best time to fish like Lake Delavan would be July, August, late summer, when the water's really hot and the weeds are growing up, and the fish tend to bite really well in the evening and in the morning on those lakes. I think, again, with all the boat traffic during the day, you probably want to hit the water in the early morning or evening to get the best results. Lake Superior, I've only been up there a few times in my life. It's one of those spots that it's a little bit longer drive. Chequamegon Bay is like world-class fishing for everything. It's part of the Great Lakes, and so everything is huge out there. I mean, massive lake trout, walleye, muskie, northerns, giant smallmouth bass. I think the minimum size limit on Chequamegon Bay is like 20 inches, minimum to keep. So, I mean, it's trophy across the board. You can fish out of Ashland, you can fish out of Washburn. There's harbors, like the Great Lakes typically have harbors, and you can fish out of those. The Chequamegon Bay is really a shallow basin off of Lake Superior, and it's protected by a rock jetty. So it's really kind of, it can get rough and windy, but it's pretty protected from the main lake, so it warms up quicker and the fishing is really, really good. You can also catch salmon and trout in the bay and out in Lake Superior as well, which I've done over the years. I've trolled for salmon out there and caught some nice fish too when I was younger. And then another really cool place that I think is just a gem in Wisconsin is the northern peak of Wisconsin. Fishing the tributaries that feed into Lake Superior are just amazing. The trout that are in those, a lot of them are native trout and salmon that run up those tributaries for spawning and stuff like that. I had an opportunity I had a friend who had a place up there in Herbster, Wisconsin, which is about a 5.5 hour drive, 6 hour drive, depending on how you drive, but used to go up there trout fishing and just the water's so cold that you don't have to worry about catching chubs and rough fish or anything like that. You just use a little piece of night crawler or a worm, and you let it drift down into pools, darker pools, deeper pools, and you catch all kinds of trout. Bring your mosquito repellent, that's all I would say. But and maybe your bear spray, because there's a lot of bears up there too. But it's pretty wild up there, and really some just amazing views. And I'll just close quickly with just the boat. Like Pastor Aaron, we had a launch team meeting, and he basically said, all right, we're going to try to promote the church in any way we can without sinning. And I remember him saying that. I thought to myself, how can I help promote church and our faith? And I love to fish, so I thought, maybe there's some way I can tie the two together. And Jerry and I kind of put our heads together, and we agreed that we'll just put the church on the side of the boat. We get out quite a bit, and our hope is that people will see that we've got Matthew 4:19 on the side of the boat, Mark 1:17, which is two Bible verses that I really like, talking about Jesus and his basically asking Simon Peter and Andrew to drop their nets. They were fishermen in the Sea of Galilee, drop their nets and follow him to go be fishers of men. which, you know, that's what we're called to do as his disciples, to go and, you know, fish for people. And so, I mean, hopefully we can do that, we can continue to do that, and we can bring people into a relationship with God. So that's why we're doing it, and, you know, we're excited about it. So that's all we got.